回来锁定汉天卫视卫星频道31.2，每天晚上7点为您带来最全面的疫情信息。接下来，请导播将信号切换到连线直播间。今天与我们连线的是华盛顿大学政治系和杰克逊国际关系学院的教授，国际政策研究所所长，亚洲和国际政治方面的专家唐纳德·赫尔曼博士，请他与我们一起聊一聊疫情和大选的相关话题。First of all, good morning, Doctor. I'm very happy to have you today. So, how are you doing recently?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm actually writing and surviving in the middle of a virus.
Yes. So today I'm going to talk with you. Some topic is about our election, which is coming soon, and also about the COVID-19. So it's a very important thing for 2020, right? This is the two things is really important. So how is Corona-19 in Seattle right now?
Well, we were the first to be diagnosed with it.
Yeah.
And our response has been really quite good, but we technically are among the states in which the virus is rising, but we are not actually considered among those that are spurting. And so it's good. It's good. But the schools are closed or, virtual, as it were. The university is virtual. Mm-hmm. And so all the precautions necessary are in place.
So right now it's getting better and better, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you think the virus affect the society, the whole American society?
Well, if I really knew, I would probably get very rich. But I think it's clear that there are several variables that will affect it. I mean, I'll start with the one that's most shocking to me. There was a recent poll that said only 40% of the United States population would take a vaccine once it was developed. Mm-hmm. So if you have just say, for argument's sake, 50% of the United States not taking a vaccine, the effect will be, of course, very, very serious. And it will depend on how the government, the central government, if Trump is elected, this anticipates a little bit what's going on, it is clear he will do nothing beyond what he has done. And that will mean that at least half the country will be without not follow or be requiring to follow guidelines that, social distancing, masking, and testing. And obviously that would have a very severe impact on the United States. Most estimates are that were he to be reelected and follow this, his policy of his advisor, that another 1.5 million people would die if the virus was allowed to run. So that's the most extreme case. On the other hand, if, for example, Biden is elected and he will try to do what everybody else in the world has done, with the exception of Sweden and a few other non-undeveloped places. He will try to have a uniform national policy mandating mask wearing and other things. Now, some states may not follow it, and some people may not follow it because it's political. It's been wearing a mask has become not defined by medicine, but by politics. And for me to conjecture about the depth of commitment to Trump and his policies, even if he loses, for 40% of the American people, which are likely to vote for him, is very, very difficult. So I think our challenge will be extremely hard. That's my third point, is that the virus is not national, it's international. And if a vaccine is developed, it will have to be distributed globally because of the transportation, and the globalized world makes this inevitable. It's not a policy choice, it's the way the world works. And so the answer to your question would involve conjecturing about how quickly at least the major trading nations in the transportation grid are able to implement their policies that allow travel and so forth. And that only one can conjecture about. What I would say is that this will, except for Trump maybe, this will greatly enhance the power of governments, including our own. They are the ones that will define the perimeters of the spread by what they do and how effectively they do it and how effectively they cooperate with other countries. So the challenge is a one for the new normal in the world. We live in a globalized world and in which everybody is globalized. It's not an issue of policy. It's an issue of a digital revolution, maybe even a biotechnical revolution that is global. And defense is no longer simply who can blow up most easily the rest of the other countries. It's much broader than that. In this case, health is now obviously a major security issue. And I would argue that the side effects on the economy but so maybe the Defense Department is going to have people involved with the business world as well as the doctors. But
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes. So how do you think our government behaved about this COVID-19, the pandemic, about how to stimulate the economy, how to protect our peoples, and how to cooperate with other countries? So right now, Americans still the highest infections in the whole world. Is that we have the most people get affected by the COVID-19. So do you think our government did a good job?
Well, the government up to now has been a failure in addressing the virus, and it's a failure because Trump has not articulated a clear policy. I mean, had we, as he was aware was what was needed back in January, had he actually implemented what China, Italy, everybody else did by having a national policy and then using the resources and the money from the federal government as well as the legal presidency, the legal capacity. He did invoke the War Powers Act, which allows him to do things by declaring an emergency and acting in an effective way. Now, the problem is he didn't do that, and therefore the policies were deferred to the various states, each one of which did different things. Now, some of them took very stringent measures, particularly in the Northeast, particularly New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey, where the initial spurt was made, and they were very effective because they had strong leadership. But it was local. It was or state. I shouldn't say local. It was state and local, and it remains that way today. They are among the most effective doing it. But Trump not only did not do anything, he conduced to making it political. He wearing a mask was political. In the first debate with Biden, he laughed at Biden for having worn a mask. Well, if you are an American citizen and the President of the United States is laughing at his opponent for wearing a mask, while Dr. Fauci and all of the other scientists and epidemiologists are saying, you must wear a mask, you must have social distancing, we must improve testing. The confusion of the messages of the government inhibit people, and everybody now is very frightened about this. I mean, for example, in Iowa, a state with a conservative governor. And but now they are opened up, but nobody goes out to be open because they're so frightened and confused about it. So this becomes a problem that can only be solved by strong, bold leadership that is consistent and is national, not at the discretion of the political leaders in each state. And that up to now, we've had a mess. I mean, we have, what is it, 4.5% of the world's population and 25 to 30% of the deaths. And although we are improving therapies that are reducing the rate of death from people that are hospitalized, we still are losing, close to 1,000 a year. And of course, as the weather gets colder and people stay inside, this is likely to accelerate the number of infections, hospitalization, and undoubtedly in the end deaths.
Yeah, so how do you think our economics will get better in next year or in how many years after?
Well, I think there are three basic problems, that one of which has been, I think, effectively dealt with in this country. I mean, one of the problems is access to capital to get things started. Now, unfortunately, the leadership in this was done by the Federal Reserve and its capacity to lower interest rates and, if necessary, accelerate the volume of money available for, and of course, the stock market has soared because this is an effective way of, at least in the capital market sense, of making things proper. Second problem, though, with economics is the smaller companies, the mom and pop ones, the ones unfortunately where most immigrants are employed when they first come to this country. And the government did provide adequate or a lot of money. Much of it has not been expended even to take care of these places. For some reason, the federal government is not doing that. Trump is not doing that, and now they're trying to pass another bill, and Pelosi and the Democrats have had a bill passed for, I don't know, 5 months or 4 months, I guess it was in June, to appropriate yet another $1 trillion+ to pay, to directly address the issue of funding the people who are unemployed, who own small businesses that are now shuttered because they're not critical, and then the landlords that own those businesses, they're going to go broke because the people can't pay their rent, and the eviction postponement, which was part of the, again, another bill, that expires very shortly now, I think, in a month or so. So the whole problem of small businesses and dealing with a level of unemployment unprecedented, even by the Great Depression. We have, they say this, we've gone strongly and so forth, but yes, it's true. It's faster than they anticipated, but it's still the worst ever. And how you do, that will take a number of years, slowly, if someone gets in that releases the money and through, if the government gets in to the fray to deal with. So that's the second big issue. And then thirdly, and in many ways the most unpredictable but important, is the fact that we are in a digital revolution. The people not just work from home, but it looks like they're getting used to doing that, and in many ways it's going to involve a tremendous reduction in certain industries like transportation. I mean, people are not going to drive into the major cities, as well as the worst one of all is, of course, real estate. The big cities, and Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, New York, the real estate particularly here, I'm talking from Seattle, it's a boom place. But and many new buildings are going up in the central city and so on. And Amazon's headquarters is there and so on. But I think now we have more employees than Silicon Valley that are involved in technology. But they don't have to come into work in the middle of the city. They already are doing significant amounts of work from home in many of particularly the technology areas. And so the people that are building transportation grids and pricing real estate as if everybody was going to New York City or one of these other big, are going to find it very difficult. They're going to go bankrupt, or they're going to be a lot of empty apartments that should have been offices that are located there, and that is a problem which no one really knows. And I can give you a conjecture, but no one really knows, because these are decisions that vary from industry to industry. Everything is not going to be virtual. Clearly, it's not going to be virtual, and as well as and therefore, what mixture is going to be decided by industry, by technological innovations, and finally, in the world in which I have made my career, education is probably one of the most difficult of all. Virtual education is simply not the same as going to school and interacting with other peers, as they put it. And moreover, once the impact of the digital revolution is clearer, there will be different industries that thrive. Obviously, my guess is the West Coast is going to supplant the East Coast as being the center of things. No one's talked about this, but 15 years ago, if you talked about the 5 most heavily capitalized companies in America, that except for Microsoft, they were all on the East Coast. And now they're all on the West Coast. And that is, no one talks about this, but that is an illustration of how a technological revolution, like the Industrial Revolution, but this is digital, will reshape the basic structure of our society, not just capital, but how people behave. What's going to happen to the airlines? I mean, they have to exist, but they cannot expect to be the same as they are now, especially since businesses find it much cheaper to digitize their communications than ride on them. So the answer to that is that all aspects of society are going to be affected by this, most in uncertain ways. I would argue even more, one step beyond that, wars are going to be different. No one's going to blow everybody up by hydrogen bombs and so on, because no one can win. What was it called? Mutual assured destruction. You're not going to have China and the United States, or the United States and another developed nuclear country, say North Korea. North Korea is not going to bomb the United States with a nuclear weapon, or take out Los Angeles, for example. What would happen if they did that? It would be goodbye to 23 million North Koreans in probably 20 minutes. And therefore, war is not going to stop, obviously, but these will be smaller conventional encounters. You have to deal with terrorist things and so on that will persist. But cyber war and the kind of stuff that's going on right now, just influencing our elections, and has gone on, and will be extended to all aspects of society. And it's not just who's going to get artificial intelligence the fastest. Well, that's an interesting question, but how artificial intelligence is going to affect our society. Who would have thought that the cell phone would take over the world? Nobody did, including people that Bill Gates, who lives here in Seattle, he was 4 years into the internet before he discovered it and got into it. Even the best, the smartest, and the already committed technology companies cannot anticipate what particular aspect of the world will be affected by it. And finally, I would argue that most of the countries in the world are artificial. They owe their existence to colonialism, imperialism, and they have only existed because the United Nations said you can be a nation if you do this and so on. What do you think is going to happen when you can communicate around the world for virtually nothing on your cell phone, on your other phones? Do you think these countries are going to survive? China will survive. Japan will survive. What? Because their demographics are so uniform. I mean, you have 92.4% people in China are Han Chinese. Well, you know, and similarly in Japan and Korea, and there are a few other places, but the rest of the world, if you can communicate, why would, you know, I think there will be a need for reorganizing the structure of the international system. And it's not just because someone sits down and says, I want to reorganize it. I mean, it's the way the media usually describe it. It's going to be because the capacity to survive in a digitized world is going to be very different. And you can complain about, for example, China will face the issue of, you know, they rose because they had a well-trained and very cheap workforce as people move from the countryside to the cities and so on. Well, this is going to happen all over the place. And who knows what new technologies are going to do to induce, whether they're labor intensive or not labor intensive. So this is the equivalent of a revolution that will unfold over the next, certainly the 21st century. I won't be around to see it, you will. And good luck to figure out how all this is going to.
Yes, so the pandemic is kind of changing the society, but it's a change, but a challenge as well, right? So every industry will get their own like booming or changing. So because of the pandemic, make 2020 is so different, and also our American has our election this year in the coming like next week. So right now we already have like 2 debates. So how do you think about the 2 speeches and also our 2 candidates?
Well, first of all, the word debate is inappropriate. I was a debater when I was in college, and you get a book and you get facts, and you have to argue pro and con. Now, Mr. Trump, President Trump, and Vice President Biden are arguing about what facts are.
Yeah.
You know, I say the world is black, you know, no, that's white. And then they make a speech based on different facts. And therefore, in the first debate, to answer your question specifically, that was not even a conversation. They just yelled at each other, interrupted, ignored the rules completely, which a debate mandates you do. And therefore, that was not a debate. And Trump, I think, it's my conjecture, that he probably was in the early stages of the coronavirus and was clearly out of control in a psychological way. And I think he realized. Now, last night's debate was very different. The moderator was superb in defining or asking questions that provoked answers, some of which had addressed issues that hadn't been addressed before. And then she managed to keep on a leash these 2 men, particularly President Trump, so that you actually had differing points of view. So to answer your question, the second debate was, it's not a debate in the usual sense, but the second encounter that took place was much more like past presidential debates, where issues of policy were articulated, and what you were left with was a very distinct, different vision for the future by each of these people. Now, to be sure, most of the things that President Trump said were not factual. I mean, he made up facts endlessly, and they're in a limited time that you are given for this. You cannot correct say, otherwise the moderator, who was did a superb job, they would have gone on forever. And you're wrong, no, you're wrong, and then we would be right back to debate number one. But what came out of it, and I think is important, is that there is now a choice to be made. I mean, President Trump basically has said three major things. I mean, one is we have succeeded in controlling the virus. Now, it happens that every single day we're getting more people, they're setting new records, and it's growing. And predictions of the scientists are that we're probably going to go up even more as the weather gets colder. Los Angeles will be all right, but places in the northern part of the country are going to rise precipitously because people will be inside. And on the other hand, Biden said, no, if I get in, I'll do what everybody else has done. I will mandate. In other words, mask wearing and social distancing and testing. And I will insist that this is carried out because I am going to have the force of the federal government. And secondly, on how are we going to deal with one of your earlier questions, the economic issues? Well, clearly, whoever is president, I don't care even if Trump, they're going to have to spend trillions more. Otherwise, the country, the gap between Wall Street and Main Street is going to get worse, or it's going to drag out, and it will be very difficult to do much more than keep the country going. But somebody has got to reach out to people who are being evicted and don't have jobs, and so it's a kind of traditional depression almost level of economy. So whoever is elected, and Trump rejects the idea of strong government, so I don't know what is going to happen. He will have to do that, or there will be precipitous reaction from the people doing that. So the question in this case is not whether a big government is going to have to act and print more money. Remember, the states do not have printing presses. They have to balance budgets. The federal government just calls up the mint and says, turn, or passes laws, and you can print extra money to do it. You're going to have to do the latter. There's no question about that. I don't care who. And so how that works is dependent, unfortunately, on how the world works, because other countries may be more severely affected by it. And so it's hard to say, except that governments are going to have to spend much more money to try to get the economy going together. And I would expect that governments would be reorganized to do this, not the way, and certainly universities are going to have to be reorganized. You just cannot have, studies of international defense issues in one place. You're going to have the public health and the medical schools and the law schools and computer science, and linking the problems of the world more specifically to knowledge and the capacity of what you're going to learn. So I guess, my reaction, as I articulated earlier, is that yes, in the future, what was talked about last night is going to be really a preface, maybe even a footnote, because we are going to be driven by the needs of the country. I think right now, Biden is, ahead in all the polls, and particularly in all the critical states that are necessary to do it. Much of that, whether rightly or wrongly, is not due solely to Trump's failure as president. He is, monumentally incompetent. He can't really discuss policies because he doesn't really like to govern. And his political power is from his personality and playing on fears of people whose lives have not improved as much as they think they ought to have done. Now, the fact that he does that, but unfortunately he really is a person that has difficulty telling the truth, and he is vulgar and profane, anti-women, maybe he's a misogynist, and these I don't myself know why 35 or 40% of Americans find this attractive, but I think a significant number of older people, women, minorities, obviously people of color, no matter who they are now being turned off by it. And I think he will have a difficult time winning the election, and he will have even a harder time governing if he were to be elected. Whether Biden will do it or not, I don't know. Obviously, his vice president is from California, is very bright and very strong and decisive. And I know many Republicans feel she's going to be president in 6 months, effectively, if not in fact. But I'm not sure anybody can easily move this. It'll all depend on whether the Democrats control the Senate, as well as the House and the presidency. If they don't, it's going to be very difficult to do much very dramatic. I mean, you will just be what's the famous image, the Dutch boy with his finger in the dike to prevent the flooding of the Netherlands. That's what the president will be.
Yes, you just mentioned the colored people right now support Biden more than Trump. So how do you think about Chinese community involved in this election? So do you think each of these candidates, if they get the election, they become to the president? How do you think their policy against China?
I won't conjecture about, you know much better than I do, the structure of electoral preference in the Chinese community here. I would be surprised if they were, I think they were very sympathetic to Trump in 2016, much more so than I ever would have thought. Now I'm not so sure. I think there are three things I want to say about that question. I mean, first of all, as a lifelong student of Asia and so forth, and I have consulted in Washington, D.C., in the White House and everywhere there, what astonishes me is how even liberals, as well as conservatives, have taken on an anti-Chinese posture. I mean, the New York Times, which is, a liberal, at least sympathetic to tolerating China and so on and so forth, they are overwhelmingly critical of Xi Jinping and throwing out the people that are the reporters from China and so on. And then, of course, the conservatives dislike China for another reason. They dislike it because it's communist and because they're reflecting their usually older views of derivative from the Cold War. And that's upsetting to me. And something has got to be done about bringing communication between this country and there. And I happen to think that it should rest with your generation and then the next two generations. And it will involve education, student exchanges, and travel. The world is global. That's not an issue. No one can argue. And China has got to understand the limits of national or nationalist activity in a globalized world, just as the United States must. In the debate, the brief discussion of China last night was, I thought, very superficial. I mean, Biden, at one point, Trump has repeatedly said, China will own the United States and everybody will have to learn Chinese and all that, but that's just Trump raving. But he has used China, much as he uses everybody in every country, to suit his purposes. He loved Xi Jinping when he was going to sign a trade agreement, and then he imposes tariffs, and then as a political, because he knows the mood of America is not necessarily sympathetic to China, he uses that to bash China. Well, now Biden has had a long interest in China, but he is, I would describe him as a typical liberal. I mean, he will do what Hillary Rodham Clinton would have done had she been elected. complain about the fact that China was not a democracy, that only by doing that, instead of acknowledging that the success of China was rooted in their revolution, their culture, and you can't expect, 1.5 billion people to suddenly abandon their culture and say, well, you've got to be democratic the way we are. There has to be a compromise. I'm a specialist on Japan, and I wrote a book, my doctoral thesis actually, which was translated, saying that Japan was a kind of democracy, but not what we intended, even though we wrote the Constitution, occupied them for 7 years, and so on, and supported them in the Cold War. And recently, to my amazement, University of California Press at Berkeley, which published the book, and selected it as one of the best in the 125 years they've been in operation that they've ever published. Why? Because I was the only one around saying, this is an Asian or a Japanese style of democracy. It's not our democracy. You couldn't possibly understand Japan unless you learned the language, went over and lived there, and that's what's going to happen for China. I think I think one of the greatest things that ever happened was 370,000 students from China came here for several years, and some adjusted nicely to America. Some just had a good time. Others, and I would say this, a majority of them, learned how different it was, and they had their ideas changed, and they will be a force in China no matter what in the future. How? I don't know. They don't know what that's going to happen to them. But that kind of exchange, which is blocked by what Trump is doing, and in many ways by this inexplicable mood of being anti-China in this country, that has to change. We must be cultivating, doing what you're doing, broadcasting in China, and so to get a realistic picture, and then let both countries and both peoples figure out what's going on. That would be so I thought that what Biden's comment was, well, you've got to make China behave according to global rules. Well, yeah, that's fair, but we are the ones that withdrew from the temperature warming agreement. The Paris Accord is what it's called formally, and he is the one that imposed tariffs. Well, Xi Jinping, who China is not a free trading nation in the fullest sense of the word. He's now the champion of free trade. My point is that countries will change. I happen to think China and the United States will be the dominant players in whatever system imagined, not necessarily imposing their values on the world, but the leaders, because they have power. And what they need now is to develop an understanding, and certainly to normalize relations between themselves. Even if they're competitive, they'll always be competitive politically. That's inevitable. But recognizing shared interests, and those interests are clearly those of global warming, managing the digital revolution, developing an international financial system, and now above all, having an international health arrangement that could coordinate these things. This is what the future is going to be for between China and the United States. Whatever passing mood happens to prevail in American establishment, in the Chinese community, and even in China itself, all of them are going to have to adjust to a still formulating new world and figure out what to do.
Yeah, so eventually the two countries has to compromise a little bit and then be friendly again, right?
Well, they have to. Otherwise, the world will be. I was invited last year to go to China 3 times, initially by the Chinese Academy of Sciences, to appraise BRI. And what I said to them surprised them. I mean, because I then was invited back to in April. I went in January, and then I went back in April when the Central Committee held this meeting at Tsinghua University to evaluate, the success of BRI, and I participated in that, and I spoke again in December. I was invited back by yet another. And what I said were two things. I said, one is that China is doing the right things to adjust to the world. They created the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. They are working on global warming. They're promoting free trade and so on. I said, but so far it's been purely economic. BRI says we build infrastructure because we have, $3.5 trillion in foreign exchange reserves. And this is just what the Japanese did in the 60s and 70s. They had foreign exchange reserves and they built infrastructure and they used Japanese workers, just as the Chinese are using Chinese workers. And that's why I was invited, because I'd written the critical evaluation of Japanese foreign policy, which was published in Singapore or somewhere in Asia. And they were interested. And I said, you have to add, if you're going to really lead in the world, you're going to have to develop trust. And trust transcends building roads. It transcends building ports. You can't buy trust. You have to understand and tolerate what other people value as their identities. And that you have to add that dimension. I don't care when or how you do it, but you can't do it by economics alone. And you just take it. Okay, the phone rang, just hang it up, say I'm busy. And the second point I made was what I said earlier. I said, you people are going to spend $1 or $2 trillion to control Asia and then the world by your BRI. I said, do you know what the world is going to look like in 2050? In the middle? Nobody does. And I said, so you better be holding these meetings, which actually she is doing. I admire him. He's doing the right thing every 3 or 4 years to find out how the digital revolution and other attendant things are affecting the way the world runs. But you just can't go in and you don't invest $2 trillion in something that you don't even know what the risk is, because you don't know what it is. And they were very taken back. That's why I kept getting invited back. They could not really answer. So it's a challenge, but I think it's a challenge that can be met. I think China so far has done better than the United States has in acknowledging all of this, but it's imperative that there be bilateral cooperation and we can go from there. Anyway, that's my, and they apparently like it because I keep coming back to this,
Yes.
I'm trying to work out arrangements between Tsinghua and other universities in China and American universities so they can exchange students. Above all, get American students to go to China and see what it's all about.
Yes, so I think the intense situation is just a temporary. So eventually the world still need to get to cooperation together. And let's go back to the election topic. So Dr. Hellmann, so how do you think our President Trump will get the second term? So usually in the past, all the presidents seems like they can get the 2 terms, right? So, but this year, the situation is kind of different. So right now it's pretty tricky. Like the Wall Street, they support Biden, and the color people, they support Biden. So how do you think that President Trump will get it again?
Well, I have 3 points to make. I mean, first of all, this is not 2016.
Mm-hmm.
In 2016, both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump had disapproval ratings of 60%. They vied with each other. Joe Biden has an approval rating now of close to 60%, and Trump is now somewhere down around 40 because, and so what I'm saying is the personalities involved are very different because now we know what Trump is doing. Not the policies, but just, he's a vulgar, relatively uneducated person who doesn't enjoy, he never thought he would win. He doesn't enjoy making policy decisions and so on. So that's the first point. The personality, in my opinion, is probably more than that. In terms of policy, the anti-immigration, anti-women, anti-minority, lack of empathy when most of these issues are critical issues. The role of women in the world is going to change. It is changing, and it will get more, they get more educated and wealthy and so on. And this will happen in every country and not just America. But he's on the wrong side of all those issues. He does have empathy. You know, his biggest mistake, in my opinion, in that debate was his answer to these 545 children who were separated from their parents. He didn't criticize that, say it's a mistake, we shouldn't have done it. All he could scream about is who built the cages. He had no empathy whatever for, and he wouldn't. Well, that, I don't know how you would react, but most mothers and women, when you say it's okay to tear your children away from you and against their will and so on and so forth, I don't care what they're not, as a matter of fact, where they're kept in these cages, so it was called torture by an international organization. And so it's hard to, he said they're beautifully cared for, you know, get their teeth brushed and eat food, and that's good and so on. So I think that policy and his being wrong on so many issues, tariffs with China, which is just a tool. It wasn't, he doesn't care. And similarly with Kim Jong-un. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, you seriously believe that Kim Jong-un is going to give up his nuclear weapons? Well, that's absurd. I mean, why would he? The North Koreans are world class only in one respect. They build tunnels. And I can guarantee you their 2,200 tunnels will have their nuclear weapons in them, no matter with whom they sign an agreement, whether it's China, the United States, or elsewhere. So, but he distilled that whole issue into his just talking to Kim. Actually, I thought that was good. I think we should have talked to him a long time ago, but he doesn't solve anything. He acknowledges the need for change, and I agree with that. I think we all of our alliances and stuff, but he has nothing to offer in a constructive and meaningful way. That's the second point. He's on the wrong side of issues, and he has no positive solutions, even if his diagnosis is appropriate in terms of opening a dialogue. And then finally, he's run a terrible campaign. He's such an egomaniac that he had millions and millions of dollars. And he bought ads in the Super Bowl for millions, and he now is way behind Biden in terms of money. He does not have enough money, and now what's happened is that that he caught the virus by doing what he said everybody should do. He and his family, his wife and son all caught the virus, which I think was a shock because everybody in the United States is really fearful of all this. So the combination of no money, having the virus, and getting a very late start after Biden amazingly has this huge lead. Now, it's possible that there are people like in 2016 who don't want to admit that they like Donald Trump because he's such a vulgar human being but so ineffective. But I think the situation is very different. I would be very surprised if Biden, at the very least, would win, for example, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, where he has leads of varying between 6 and 9%, 12 days before the election. And if he takes those three, which he won by 65,000 votes or 70,000 votes combined, the whole, he will have the Electoral College. And so I think the numbers speak very strongly to a likely Biden village. Now, Trump will do all kinds of things to deny that. The one problem I really see, even if Biden wins, is, see, I'm very popular.
Yeah.
And I'm supposed to be, anyway, that is what he threatens to do. He threatens not to step down graciously. And there are no procedures for really dealing effectively with that. And he's pointing people to this woman Bennett to the Supreme Court, saying the court will decide. If he loses, then the court will decide. Because I don't think that's feasible, because there is no proof. And it's very difficult to get proof. And the people that count the ballots are bipartisan. And so people are going to have to be, Republicans are going to have to be charged with fixing the election. So I don't think that, but it will create a very serious problem in the middle of this virus that would, I think, not only diminish the image of the United States in the world, but would cause severe domestic internal problems. And it's so, for me, I think the Democrats are right that this is a vote for the soul of America, not just whether Donald Trump gets in.
Yeah, so we just hope like everything can go back to the normal very, very soon. So do you think the vacancy will come in very soon?
Pardon?
The vacancy.
I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
I don't know. So Trump said the vacancy will come out between the election, but I think until now this is still not coming out. So I just hope maybe next year everybody can get in the vacancy.
Well, all I can do is quote Fauci, who is actually quite optimistic that some sort of vaccine will be announced in November or early December, that the distribution of it will begin sometime in January, but it will be prioritized for the first, the people that take care of the workers, the medical workers and the elderly and so forth, but that the actual serious distribution of it will not really take place till the middle of August or the third quarter of next year. And then as I opened this discussion, I said, only 40% of Americans now will take the vaccine. I mean, and so, I mean, if that remains true, I mean, I assume it will go up a little bit anyway, but it will, and then the question is, if we get up to, say 60%, is this going to allow us to economically perform? And the most important question is, how is this going to affect the world? Are we going to distribute the vaccine throughout the world? I mean, are other countries, they have agreed, many of them, and some of the companies have actually worked together as companies. But this is a global problem. And you have to distribute this to not just 360 million Americans, but billions of people around the world, or at the very least, 4 or 5 billion of people who are actively involved in trade. And therefore, it's going to be a lot longer. There'll be a lot more programs like this focusing not on the election, but on the vaccine.
Yes. So right now, people get scared. They try to stay far away from each other, keep the social distance, and try to reduce their go out times. Do you think after the pandemic, the people's life is going to be changed, lifestyle?
My short answer, probably too quick. My short answer is, we have suspended civilization. I mean, there's no entertainment. School has been redefined. You can't travel to meet your families if their families are. You can't live in the 21st century, after evolution over thousands of years without society operating, and one way or another, it will return. How and in what form and how in the world in which we live this is what my criticism of BRI was, that people have their own views, have their own communities, have their own identities. And if they don't have that, they have nothing. I mean, what is left? There's no entertainment, there's no school. Society will have to adjust. I mean, in one way or another, and you can't buy that. This has to evolve, and this is why we desperately need leadership. So in answer to your question, yes, we will return to something. How and why, and certainly the government will have to facilitate, particularly the economic component. But whether it will be, what it will be like, I have no idea. And I guess I have to be very sarcastic and cynical and say, I'm glad I lived when I did.
Yes, we get changed, but we cannot keep in solid forever, right? So we have
impossible.
Yeah, so eventually we need friends, family, we need like kiss each other, hug each other. Yeah, we need handshake.
Exactly. That's what life is about. That's civilization. And you do it in different ways, and you respect different kinds of people in different societies, but you must relate to people. You can't not suspend civilization.
Yes. Okay, so the only thing is like we just hope everything is going to be fine very soon. Thank you so much, Dr. Hellmann. Thank you for your conversation with me today, and thank you for your time.
It's my pleasure. It's been fun to talk with you. And,
thank you. And I hope you will be well in the future. And also we hope to talk with you next time if we have time.